Hello, everybody. People watching now, people watching in the future, time travelers, as I always say. I'm quoting the great, legendary, the late Coast to Coast. How you guys doing? Everybody kind of give you guys a little bit of time to spill in. We're going to listen to some of this melancholic jazz with piano. Some YouTube music. Let me lower it. Said we're giving everybody time to roll in. Doing the beta read of Chapter 3 of Eyesbane, Old BOREA. When we've last left our triad, they were investigating a missing merchant shipment and the merchants themselves. The trail, thinking it was Vraffi. They are these little slimy, snake-like burrowing creatures, similar to goblins. Thinking it was them, they followed the trail deeper into the forest where it led to the broken tower of a thousands-year-old fallen empire. Known as Old BOREA. And this is the spire. Yeah. And Art Bell, shout out to him. That's why I quote time travelers each time I do it. Kind of chill and let the music kind of roll. I'm a little late for my own party. Or, like I said, anybody that watches this in the future, God bless you. I hope you like jazz. Little late night atmosphere. Yeah, and after the live reading, after the little discussion, a little talking, I'm going to play some old time radio tonight. So if you're feeling restless, you want something to listen to while you're sleeping, listen to the old time radio here tonight. It's going to be Hall of Fantasy. That will get stories. I'm going to let everybody enjoy. Let the music play. Let everybody kind of come in for a second. I'm going to get ready to read the next chapter. Let everybody rolling in a little bit before we start. Hello, Ivan, the Terrible. Fancy little jazz. Getting some people rolling in here. I'm trying to get my regular crowd in before we start reading. What up, Anthony? Nice. We got Anthony in the house. We'll start doing chapter 3 Everybody a little bit more time to roll in. We'll go over some news. Weird news, nothing too deep with the world. How are you guys doing tonight? Tuesday? Tanish K. Patel. Huh. Nice to meet you. Interesting name. Yeah, there's something about jazz I really appreciate. I've only been listening to it for a few months now, give or take. But it has a way of just calming you and helping you gather your thoughts. That I really appreciate. I've been doing good, Anthony. I'm kind of in an in-between period right now. My serious life I've been taking care of. My creative life has been almost driving me insane. Yeah, putting my philosophy and my beliefs into this world has been quite the journey. Let me see. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll get it started. There's a mini Mozart heist. Read into that real quick before we start the show, the reading, as it were. Mini Mozart heist blights anniversary tribute as thieves make off with 210 statuettes. The little Mozart. They've been out there stealing little Mozarts. Oh, let me show you. Foolish me. Foolish me. Interesting. 210. What are they doing at 210 gold Mozarts? In Salzburg, Austria, more than 200 gold statuettes of Austria's most famous composer disappeared from his hometown of Salzburg. Officials said Wednesday, leaving a tribute to Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart on his 270th birthday considerably less crowded. The Mozartian Foundation on July 15th unveiled 310 statues, barely 50 centimeters, less than 20 inches. So they had 320 of these little gold statues, showing Mozart with his dog. They were designed by German conceptual artist Ottmar Harl, I believe is the pronunciation. Within 2 weeks, more than 80 of the polymer figures had disappeared. By Wednesday, a total of 210 were missing. The worst thing for an artist is when his work dissolves, Horrell told the German news agency DPA. He said he did not believe visitors stole the works, but rather that it was an organized theft. Horrell intended to sell the statues for about €100, $114, once the exhibition was over. Meaning whoever ran away with the 210 mini Mozarts has not become an overnight millionaire. The mini Mozarts populated not only the garden of the composer's former house, but also his living quarters, as well as several pavilions. While the organizers put aside some spare statuettes in case of theft, there were too few to compensate for the actual losses. And in a further stroke of bad luck, the manufacturer of the statues was away on holidays, so there's no quick fix. The exhibition of statuettes, now more widely spaced, is scheduled to remain on display until August 30th. Interesting. I hear Austria. I hear all this stuff getting stolen. People thinking these little golden statues are probably worth more than what they are. I think my ignorance. Thank you, Retro. Jesus loves you too, brother. We're all looking at how Jesus is loved. Alright, yeah, without further ado, before it gets too funky, Do chapter 3. Like I said, anybody that watches here in the future, you will see the restream of it. Chapter 3, Old BOREA. The tunnel sloped downward beneath the ruin. Cold air drifted up from the darkness, carrying the scent of damp stone and something older. Not rot, not yet. Something drier than rot. The smell of a room that had been closed longer than men had been keeping years. Geyser paused at the edge of the opening and looked into the black passage, and it seemed to look back, patient in the way only very old places could be. The silence felt too heavy even for an abandoned room. Behind him, Ramira loosened the satchel at her side and withdrew a small flat gray slate. She handled it the way other women handled heirlooms. 2 hands, thumbs along the edge, checked for cracks before every use. Geyser watched her perform that small inspection 100 times in 100 worse places, and it steadied him the way a familiar prayer steadies other men. Thomas leaned over her shoulder. Please tell me that's not one of the exploding ones. He leaned close enough to see the chalk lines, close enough that she could feel him trying not to flinch at the dark ahead. The exploding one was your fault, Ramirez said, without looking up. You bumped my elbow. I sneezed. You sneezed into an active room. And I apologized to your eyebrows every day since. Ramiro ignored him after that, which was his own kind of answer. She knelt beside the tunnel wall and pressed the slate against the stone. From a pouch on her belt, she drew a thin stick of chalk and began sketching a pattern across the grooves. The chalk whispered against slate, a small dry sound that the tunnel swallowed whole. No echo came back, and Geyser marked that, the way he marked everything a place refused to give back. 3 of the 13 rooms formed the base of the design. Lumen, Ankara, Tempest. She rotated their second rune sideways, then inverted the third, her lips moving faintly through the sequence the way scholars do when the hands know the work better than the mind trusts them to. The chalk lines shimmered faintly as the patterns aligned. Threads of silver light crept across the slate, pulling in the grooves like water finding its level. And the glyph awakened with a soft hum that Geyser felt in the back of his teeth before he heard it. A small sphere of pale blue light formed above the slate, then another, and another. 3 floating orbs drifted upward, casting a steady glow into the tunnel. The light they gave was clean and cold and touched everything equally, which was the trouble with rune light. It showed a man what was there and told him nothing about what it meant. Geyser gave a single nod, approval, and permission to keep going. Thomas tilted his head. Handy. Ramirez stood, watching the lights hover obediently. Basic scribe lanterns. You say basic, Tomas said, like the rest of us could do it. The rest of you could do it, Ramirez said, brushing chalk from her fingers. If the rest of you had spent 9 years being wrapped across the knuckles every time a line drifted the hair's width. Geyser stepped forward as the orbs drifted deeper into the passage. The corridor slowly revealed itself beneath their glow. Primordial stone, but not the same work as the tower above. The blocks were larger. Seamless where the tower's masonry had seams, and the tool marks ran in long, patient strokes rather than the Boreans' quick, precise cuts. Whoever had shaped this passage, Geyser thought, had possessed all the time in the world, and that was rarely a comfort in quality in builders. Ramira noticed it first. These stones. She ran her fingers across the surface, then pressed her whole palm flat, the way she did in reading mattered less than feeling. They're not from the tower. Thomas glanced back toward the entrance, far above. So the Boreans didn't dig this? Ramira shook her head. No. Geyser studied the corridor. The tower was built over it. Thomas frowned. Meaning this place was already here? Geyser tipped his hat at once. Meaning it was found and deemed important enough to hide. Thomas turned that over. Geyser could see him doing it. The boy had a habit of chewing the inside of his cheek when a thought didn't sit level. You hide treasure, Thomas said slowly. You hide shame. Which do you figure this was? That, Ramira murmured, seems to have become our mystery. The lanterns drifted ahead, revealing more of the descending passage. Ramira brushed her hand across one of the massive stone blocks and stopped. These are containment rooms. Geyser stepped forward, closer. For what? Ramira studied the pattern. Hard to say, her brow furrowed. She traced one ring of the design without touching it, her finger hovering a knuckle's width above the stone. An old habit. She never touched a rune she couldn't name. She never touched a symbol she couldn't name. The structure is wrong for a door ward. Door wards face outward against thieves. These face inward. She let that sit. But whatever it was, the Boreans didn't want it found, Geyser finished. Thomas folded his arms. Comforting. Hey, thank you, bro. They continued down the passage. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Not winter cold, which moves and bites, but cellar cold, which simply waits. Their breath began to show, thin ghosts that rose and vanished into the dark overhead. Thomas pulled his collar up. Ramira, who felt the cold the way stones feel rain, didn't appear to notice, but Geyser saw her shift her satchel so the slate narrowed to her hand. So the slate rode nearer to her hand. The lanterns drifted several paces ahead, revealing a long stretch of stone steps. Geyser stopped suddenly. Wait. He crouched near the floor. The steps were clean, too clean. No dust, no debris, no wind-carried leaves. There should have been leaves, or at least the gray felt of years, because the opening above it stood broken to the forest, for only the gods knew how long. In my world, they're called Keltians. Air current, maybe, Ramira offered, crouching beside him. Deep places breathe. The draft could sweep them. Geyser ran a finger across the stone and held it up to the lantern light. Smooth, recently disturbed. A draft leaves the dust in the corners, he said. There's none in the corners. Ramira looked and her mouth thinned, but she didn't argue. There was one of the things 7 years of traveling had built between them. She would offer the innocent explanation, he would test it, and neither of them wanted to be right. Geyser rose slowly. Something's been moving through here, regularly. Storm hissed faintly somewhere above the tower, the sound falling down the shaft thin and strange, arriving colder than it left. Ramira glanced back. He doesn't like it. Geyser moved down the corridor. Neither do I. The lantern light revealed deep gouges carved into the steps. Ramira crouched beside them, and the humor went out of her posture the way heat goes out of iron. I've noticed I like to put a lot of heavy sentences, so I'm going to start cutting some of my heavy sentences. Claw marks. Thomas hovered at her shoulder, peering at the gouges. Rafi. Geyser flicked a speck of dust from his sleeve. Looks like a warband was nesting here. He set his own spread hand against one of the gouges, measuring. The span outran his fingers. They moved fast. See how the strikes drag along at the back? They weren't hunting. He looked up the stairway, then down it. They were running. Thomas' brow creased. Down. If something scared them, why run deeper? Because, Ramira said, working it as she spoke, whatever scared them was behind them, between them, and the way out. The scratches continued down the steps, then stopped. Thomas looked around. Where'd they go? Geyser pointed further down. A dark smear marked the stone, old, dried. It had run once and pulled in the seam between the grooves, but something had walked after it dried. A smooth crossing, the stain unhurried. A smooth scuff crossing the stain unhurried. Like a smooth scuff crossing the stain unhurried. Romero leaned closer. Blood. Thomas pushed back to his feet, pale in the lantern glow. So the Rafi came down here. Geyser gave a brief, grim dip of his head, and something killed him. Remind me, Thomas said. Whose idea was going down? Yours, Ramira said. Ramira replied. You kicked the stone. That was investigative kicking. The lanterns drifted forward again. Their glow revealed a narrow archway carved into the stone, and around it the darkness seemed to organize itself, as if the black beyond the arch were a different quality of black than the tunnels. Ramira's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. More pre-runic glyphs, but these are different. The wards came out caught somewhere between discovery and warning. She traced the carving again, more carefully this time, and a faint smile touched her lips despite the tension in her jaw. Her notebook was already in her hand before she seemed to realize she'd reached for it. Chalk scratched quickly across the page, copying the first line of symbols before her caution could stop her. This was the original entrance to the sanctum, she said, and the wonder in her voice could not quite hide the word beneath it. Geyser looked past her, into the black beyond the arch. Ramira, his voice was quiet, but it cut cleanly through both the wonder and the worry. The traitors first. The lanterns floated through the archway. Light spilled into a wider chamber beyond. Bones littered the floor, broken, scattered, and recent. The smell reached them a heartbeat after the sight. Marrow and old meat, something underneath both, sweetish and wrong. The smell of a thing that had been opened and left. Thomas's throat bobbed. Well, that answers my question about the bodies. Not yet, Geyser said quietly. He moved the toe of his boot near one of the long bones without touching it. Look at the breaks, clean, twisted at the joints. He had seen what Brofty left behind. He had seen the work of wild beast. He'd walked battlefields after defeat. None of them looked like this. Nothing fed here. These were taken apart. Ramira crouched beside one of the remains, and her hand stopped suddenly. A small charm lay beside the bones. Bone and black thread twisted into a spiral. The same crude making as the charms in the tower above. This one's thread was newer. Its knot still tight, still holding whatever they were tied to hold. She lifted it slowly, and her voice came out flat, scrubbed with the scholar's pleasure that discovery usually put there. I know what this is. Geyser's hand moved to the hilt of Eyesbane. The bone shifted. At first only slightly. A dry tick, like settling wood, the kind of sound a man tried to convince himself he hadn't heard. Then one of the dead began to rise. The skeleton's movement wasn't natural. It didn't lurch forward. It assembled intention. Thin black threads tightened between the bones, pulling them into motion not by muscle, but by command. And where the threads pulled taut, they sang faintly, a note below hearing that lived in the chest instead of the ear. Geyser's inner sight caught it at once, a thin humming tension that pulled at his teeth, and a pressure behind the sternum like a hand closing. Death casting didn't move bodies, it moved what was left of the will. Ed's spine twisted with a brutal crack, the skull rolled towards them, the jaw opened. A dry, rattling sound escaped as something unseen pulled the corpse upright and hung there, wrong side up for a moment before the neck bones clicked into their sockets one by one, like a craftsman's finger closing the clasp. More bones shifted across the chamber floor. Bones reassembled, ribs snapping into place with a wet click. A loose jawbone dragged itself a full arm's length across the stone to reach its skull. Ramira dropped the charm. Rafi! Geyser had already drawn Eyesbane. The oath blade slid with a sharp crystalline hum, its veins flaring faint silver in the moonlight. The first skeleton lurched forward, and as it stepped into the glow, the truth became clear. I'm going to put an ellipsis there instead of a M dash. Not human. Thick forelimbs ended in hooked claws built for digging. Behind them stretched a long serpentine spine where legs should have been. The pale skull flared outward into circular jaws of a BOREA. Rows of rasping teeth still lined the protruding maw. The creature hissed through broken teeth as necrotic energy stitched its bones together with thin black. Then another skeleton rose, and another. Within seconds, 10 of the creatures rose. Undead, and in between the black threads, scraps of dried hide still clung to some of them, moving where no wind moved. Thomas drew his steel blade. "Well," he said, tightening his grip. It looks like the picture has gotten bigger." He instinctively widened his stance, one hand drifting closer to the butt of a pistol. He'd fought men before. The dead were another matter. "Thomas," Geyser said. Just the name. Level, with the way he'd said it in a dozen fights before. Weight forward, eyes up. Thomas breathed out. His weight came forward. The skeleton lunged. Geyser stepped forward without hesitation. He moved before it reached him. Eyesbane flashed once. The oath blade passed cleanly through the creature's ribcage. Light burst from the cut as the blade severed the death-binding threads, and for half a heartbeat the threads writhed loose in the air like blind worms seeking a new anchor before they blackened and drifted apart. The skeleton collapsed instantly. The second Rafi rushed Thomas. He stepped aside and drove his blade through the creature's skull. It staggered, but did not fall. The skull turned on his blade, fangs grating down the steel toward his fingers. Geyser turned, bringing Eyesbane down in a clean arc. The blade passed through bone and binding alike. The necrotic thread snapped apart. The corpses dropped, and its claws and filling raked Thomas's boot hard enough to score the leather. The hand span higher, and it would have been the tendon. Thomas rolled into his back, yanked the powder pistol free, and fired. The ball slammed into the undead's chest, dropping it into the stone. "That's for my boot, damn you," he shouted. Behind them, Ramira slammed her rune slates against the wall. Her fingers moved quickly, too quickly. Rune slate is a noun. So her fingers moved quickly, too quickly. The chalk skidded up. The chalk skidded on the first stroke, and she hissed through her teeth as she struck the line again. Clean. Ignis. The runes flared. A burst of pale flames erupted outward. 6 skeletons shattered beneath the blast, bones scattering across the chamber, and the burnt bone smell rolled over them, acrid and thick as the slammed door. The final one dead lunged toward her. Thomas intercepted it. He rolled his dark dice once across his knuckles, then drove his blade into the creature's spine. The skeleton collapsed. Silence returned to the chamber. Only the faint hum of the rune lights remained, and beneath it, their breathing, 3 ragged rhythms slowly agreeing to become calm again. Thomas let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Okay, then. That answers the Rafi question." "You're bleeding," Ramira asked, the question aimed at his boot, already crossing to him. Thomas looked down at the scored leather, flexed his foot, and shook his head. "Boots bleed. I'm insulted on its behalf." "Good." She turned away before the relief finished crossing her face. which is the closest Ramira came to fussing. She knelt beside one of the fallen skeletons. The black threads of necrotic energy were already fading, retreating into the stone like ink drawn back into a quill. Whoever laid the charms raised these thralls. She looked at the fading threads a moment longer. These are left here to guard something. Raising takes effort. You don't spend it on a room you've abandoned. She stood, brushing bone and dust from her knees. Then where's their master? Geyser's eyes drifted toward the darkness beyond the chamber. More importantly, where are the traitors? Then they suddenly heard a sound from deeper within the ruin. A faint echo, not a scream, but a whimper. Thomas turned toward the darkness beyond the chamber. You hear that? Geyser's grip tightened on Eyesbane. The rune lights bobbled toward the far wall. The rune lights bobbled toward the far wall. There, half hidden beneath broken stone, another passage sloped downward into deeper darkness. The stonework changed again. Older, cruder. The blocks unsquared. The joints packed with something dark that had never been mortared. And something else drifted from that passage. The smell hit them first. Rot, blood, thick in the air, thick enough to taste, thick enough that Thomas put the back of his hand to his mouth, and Ramira's breath went shallow and careful, the breath of a woman rationing what she took in. Ramira went pale. This, she hesitated. Geyser finished for her, is no longer a Borean sanctum or a Brothy hive. He looked toward the dark passage. The tower hid the sanctum. He raised Eyesbane slightly. But the Brothy found it, and then something else found them. Thomas stared into the darkness. What do you think we're walking into? Geyser's voice was quiet. I'm not sure, but I intend to find out. The rune lights floated on. I gotta do one edit. The rune lights floated on ahead into the deeper tunnel. The glow stretched thin against the darkness, swallowed by the passage ahead. The air grew heavier with each step. Behind them, the chamber laid still. Bones scattered, death-casting threads fading into nothing. And somewhere below, something cried. That is the end of Chapter 3. Yo, thanks for the jewels. Yeah. So I love being able to do my revisions real time. Why I am talking with you guys. I should have had it up on the screen. Yeah, hope everybody's doing good. I said I was going to do old time radio, but for the sake of efficiency, I might end on this one. Hope you guys have a great night. Thank you so much for stopping in. We're going to be back with Chapter 4 very soon. I'm in deep, heavy revisions of this novel. It's my first fantasy novel, Eyesbane, the Inheritance of Oaths and Melancholy series. So, guys, keep an eye out for me. Thank you guys so much for listening. Everybody watches in the future. Once again, thank you.